My name is Anna Mercer. I am 37 years old. On the afternoon of my mother's funeral, while I stood at a graveside in Riverside Cemetery in Concord, New Hampshire, and watched them lower a white casket into frozen February ground, my husband's mother and sister were 40 minutes away at my mother's house on Elm Street, moving through her rooms with trash bags. They filled 11 of them. My mother's handmade quilts, the shoebox of photographs from before I was born, the small wooden music box that played the first 8 notes of a song my mother used to hum while she made coffee. All of it went into black plastic bags and then into a dumpster that Diane, my husband's mother, had ordered delivered to the driveway that morning. I found out 4 hours after the burial, when I pulled up to the house and the dumpster was still there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what I found when I opened those bags, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to SoftStormStories. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I read every single one. Now let me take you back 18 months to the summer afternoon when I understood that Diane Mercer had decided my mother's life was an inconvenience she intended to manage. I live in a 2-story house in Concord, New Hampshire. My husband Thomas and I bought it 4 years ago. It has a back porch that faces a stand of birch trees, and in the late afternoon, the light through those trees is the color of old honey. I sit on that porch most evenings for exactly 20 minutes before I start dinner. That is my time. 20 minutes, a cup of tea, the birch trees. My mother's blue cardigan hangs on the hook beside the back door. I have not washed it since she died. I do not intend to. I am a licensed estate planner and trust administrator at a firm called Aldridge & Wells in downtown Concord. I have been there for 9 years. I work with families to protect what matters: property, objects, memories, the things people spend their lives building and want to leave behind intact. I keep a small silver thimble on my desk. It was my mother's, used for 30 years in the sewing room of the house on Elm Street, where she made the quilts and the curtains and 3 of my childhood Halloween costumes. She pressed it into my palm the last Christmas before she was diagnosed and said, "For the woman who knows how to hold things carefully." I have kept it on my desk every working day since. My mother, Helen Voss, raised me alone in Concord from the time I was 9. My father left when I was 8, and the details of his departure were clean and final and have never required much discussion. My mother taught 4th grade for 27 years at a public school on Warren Street and was the kind of teacher whose former students came back to visit. She was precise and warm and made the best pie crust I have ever tasted. She owned her house outright. She paid off the mortgage 11 years early by working summers at the county library, and she kept it meticulously. Every drawer organized, every surface clean, every object in its place for a reason. When I married Thomas Mercer 7 years ago, I understood that his family came with a particular set of assumptions. Diane Mercer, Thomas's mother, was 63. Retired, and had spent 40 years being the most important woman in every room she entered. She was not cruel in the ways that leave marks. She was the other kind, the kind that smiled warmly and said things that stung later when you were alone and replaying the conversation. She had a daughter, Thomas's sister, Renee, who was 34, and had learned to perform her mother's opinions back to her with small variations, like a musician who had learned one song and played it in every key. From the beginning, Diane had a view of my mother that she expressed through questions rather than statements. How large was the house? Was it in a good school district? Did Helen have any retirement savings? She asked these things with the gentle curiosity of someone taking an inventory, and when the answers confirmed what she had already decided, that Helen Voss was a schoolteacher who owned a modest house in a small city and had no wealth to speak of, she filed that information and never asked again. What she never asked about was the house itself, its history, its contents, what my mother had spent 30 years putting into those rooms. My mother was diagnosed with early onset dementia in the fall 2 years ago. She was 67.
The diagnosis came on a Tuesday morning, and I drove to the hospital alone and sat with her in the consultation room while the neurologist explained the progression, the timeline, the options. My mother listened carefully and took notes on a yellow legal pad in her precise schoolteacher handwriting. When the doctor finished, she looked at her notes for a moment, then looked at me. She said, "Well, I suppose we have things to arrange." That was my mother, straight spine, clear eyes, and a legal pad.
We spent the following 6 months arranging. I am a trust administrator. I knew exactly what needed to be done, and I did it, carefully and completely. The house went into a revocable living trust with my name as successor trustee. The personal property, every object, every piece of furniture, every quilt and photograph and music box was inventoried, cataloged, and placed under the trust's protection. I photographed everything. I created a spreadsheet with 847 items listed by room, description, approximate value, and sentimental significance. I stored 3 copies in 3 separate locations. The wound came 8 months before my mother died, on a Sunday afternoon in June when Diane and Renee came to the house for a family lunch. My mother was still living at home then, with a part-time aide. The lunch was Thomas's idea. He wanted his family to spend time with her while she was herself. I thought this was kind. I set the table on the back porch. My mother wore the blue cardigan. She was clear that day, which was a good day. After lunch, Diane walked through the house the way she had always walked through spaces she was assessing. She opened the door to the sewing room and stood in it for a moment, looking at the shelves of fabric, the organized drawers, the 30 years of careful accumulation. She turned to me. She said, "When the time comes, most of this will just need to go, won't it? It's not really the kind of thing anyone can use." She said it gently, the way you say something you consider obvious. "I mean, the quilts are lovely, but where would you put them all? And the photographs, you'll want to keep a few, but honestly, storage is just storage fees." She smiled. "It'll be easier to start fresh." I looked at her. Then I looked at my mother, who had heard every word and was looking at her hands in her lap. I said, "Nothing is going anywhere, Diane." She smiled wider. "Of course not right now. I only mean eventually." I remember the warmth of that June afternoon and the sound of a lawnmower 2 houses down and the way the light came through the sewing room window and landed on my mother's blue fabric stacked neatly on the 3rd shelf. I said nothing else. I went to sit beside my mother and took her hand. We sat there until the light changed. My mother died on February 4th. She had been in a care facility for 3 months, and she went quietly on a Sunday morning with me beside her and the aide who had become her friend sitting in the chair by the window. I made the funeral arrangements that afternoon. The service was February 7th, the burial at Riverside Cemetery at 2 p.m. I was gone from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. that day. Thomas had not come to the funeral. He had a work commitment in Boston, a conference he said he could not miss. I had accepted that with the particular quietness that comes from having accepted too many similar things over too many similar years. His mother and sister had offered to come to the service. I had said it was small, family only. They had said they understood. What I did not know was that while I stood at the graveside in February cold with 12 of my mother's friends and colleagues and former students, Diane had called a local junk removal service and a dumpster company and organized what she considered a kindness, a practical matter, getting a head start on the clearing out. Renee had helped. They had spent 6 hours in my mother's house going through rooms my mother had built over 30 years and filling 11 black garbage bags with the contents. I pulled up to Elm Street at 5:15. The dumpster was in the driveway, orange and large and wrong. I parked, I walked to it, I looked inside. I stood there for 11 minutes. Then I called my colleague, Margaret Chen, who had been my supervisor for 9 years and who was the person I trusted most with anything that required both precision and composure. Margaret had been an estate litigation attorney for 31 years before joining Aldrich & Wells. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said,
Anna, was the house in the trust? I said, yes. She said, and the personal property? I said, all of it, inventoried and photographed. She said, then come to the office tomorrow morning. Bring the files. I said, all right. She said, and tonight, don't touch the dumpster.
I did not touch the dumpster. What I did was go inside the house. I walked through every room. I noted what was gone. Then I opened the closet in the back bedroom where I had placed 3 large archival storage boxes 3 weeks earlier, after a quiet Sunday afternoon when I had moved the things I knew were most important: my mother's photographs, the music box, 4 of the quilts, the sewing basket with the silver thimble, a box of letters she had kept since 1974. I had moved them deliberately, quietly, because I had known for 8 months, since a Sunday afternoon in June, that this day might require preparation. The archival boxes were untouched. Diane had not opened that closet. She had worked quickly and taken what was visible and accessible, and had not thought to look carefully. That was the difference between a woman who understood things and a woman who assumed she already knew everything worth knowing. Margaret was my colleague for 9 years and my friend for 7. She was 61, silver-haired, the kind of attorney who read every clause and never raised her voice because she never needed to. When I arrived at Aldridge and Wells the next morning, she had already pulled the trust documents and reviewed the personal property inventory. She sat across from me and said, "The trust controls all of it. The personal property was explicitly included. What happened yesterday constituted interference with a trust asset." She paused. "There is also the matter of unauthorized entry. The house is a trust asset. Diane Mercer did not have permission to enter it." She looked at me. "You have several options." The Mercer family held an annual gathering every April, a tradition Diane hosted at her home in Bedford, New Hampshire. 31 people inside. The particular warmth and noise of a family that believed it was a good one. Diane stood near the dining room in a cream blouse and pearl earrings, orchestrating the evening the way she always did, moving between groups, directing attention, managing the room like a stage she had designed. Renee found me first. She came across the room with a smile that was effortful and said, "Anna, I'm glad you came. Mom really does feel badly. She thought she was helping." I said, "I know what she thought, Renee." Renee looked at her shoes briefly. Then she said, "It was a misunderstanding. The quilts are probably still in the dumpster if you want." I said, "The dumpster was removed 3 days ago. I had it processed as part of the trust's documentation of loss." She looked at me. She did not know what that meant. I did not explain it. Diane came to me at 7:15. She placed a hand on my arm and said, in the warm, careful voice she used when she had already decided how a conversation would go, "Anna, I want you to know how much I've thought about this. I only wanted to help. You had so much on your plate." She looked at the room. "These things, all of that clutter, Helen was a lovely woman, but she kept everything. You would have had to do it eventually." She squeezed my arm. "I saved you a very difficult task." The room had not gone quiet. It was a private conversation, but 4 people near us had stopped talking. I looked at Diane. I touched the thimble in my pocket. I said nothing. Diane continued. She raised her voice slightly, the way people do when they want to establish a version of events for an audience. She said, "And frankly, Anna, you've made this into something it wasn't. We're family. Family helps each other. The fact that you went to a lawyer over a few old quilts is—" She paused, searched for the word. "It reflects something about you that concerns me. Your mother would have wanted you to let things go." My mother's name. In her mouth. The room near us went completely still. Margaret had come with me. I had asked her to come, casually, as a friend.
She had been standing 12 feet away with a glass of water and set it down on the side table and crossed the room in 4 steps and stood beside me. She looked at Diane with the expression she used in depositions, clear, factual, entirely without heat. She said, "Mrs. Mercer, I'm Margaret Chen, Alex's colleague at Aldridge and Wells. I've been working with Anna on the administration of Helen Voss's estate." She paused. "The items removed from the house on February 7th were trust assets explicitly protected under a legal instrument filed in Mercer County in September of last year. The removal constituted an unauthorized act against a trust. The total assessed value of items confirmed lost was $23,400. Anna has documentation of every item." She paused. "We filed the preliminary notice of claim this morning. You should expect correspondence from our office this week."
The room was very quiet. Diane's smile went completely still. Her hand was still on my arm. She removed it. Renee sat down in the nearest chair without looking for it first. Thomas, who had been across the room, went pale. I stood up. I looked at Diane calmly. I said, "You didn't save me anything. Those were my mother's things. She spent 30 years making them and keeping them, and they were hers. The trust existed to protect them." I paused. My mother knew exactly what she was leaving behind, and exactly who it was for. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I looked at Margaret. "Thank you, Margaret." She nodded once. I walked to the door. 31 people watched me walk through that house. The door opened onto the cold April night. The circular driveway was lit by coach lights on either side. A car came when I called it in 40 seconds. Margaret called me the following morning. She told me that after I left, Diane had tried to reframe the conversation, had told the room that the legal claim was disproportionate, that she had been trying to help, that grief made people irrational. 2 of Thomas's aunts had stood up and left the dinner early. 3 cousins had approached Margaret near the door and asked questions about the trust. Renee cried in the kitchen. Thomas had said nothing to anyone for the remainder of the evening and drove home alone. The notice of claim was received by Diane's home address on a Thursday. She called Thomas 4 times that day. He called me once. He said his mother was sorry. I said, "I know she is." He said, "Is there a way to resolve this without—" I said, "Margaret is handling the correspondence. You can contact her directly." I heard him exhale slowly. I said, "Thomas, she did it on the day of the funeral." There was a long silence. He said, "I know." I said, "I know you know." We stayed on the phone for a moment after that, in the particular silence of a marriage that has been asked to hold something very heavy for a very long time. I called the woman who had been my mother's aide. Her name was Carmen, and she had been with my mother for 11 months and become someone I considered family in the quiet way that real things become real. I told her what had happened. She listened without speaking. Then she said, "Your mama knew you'd handle it." I held the thimble in my hand at my kitchen table. Something went through me briefly, just briefly. Then I put the kettle on. The claim was settled 4 months later. The agreed-upon amount was $19,200, less than the assessed value but sufficient and reached without litigation because Diane's attorney advised her clearly about the trust instrument and what it meant. The money went into a fund I established in my mother's name for literacy programs in Concord public schools. My mother would have found that correct. The settlement required no public statement or formal apology. There was none. Diane sent a card, 2 sentences. It did not contain the word sorry. I read it once and put it in the drawer.
I still live in the house with the birch trees in the back porch. Thomas and I are in couples therapy. We go on Wednesday evenings and we speak carefully and sometimes honestly. And I do not know yet what the shape of this marriage will be when we have finished saying everything that needs to be said, but I show up every Wednesday. That matters. My mother's blue cardigan is still on the hook by the back door. 4 of her quilts are folded in the cedar chest in the bedroom. The music box is on the shelf in the hallway. The photographs are in an archival box in the office, organized by decade, labeled in my handwriting. The thimble is on my desk, where it has always been. Last spring, I started a volunteer program at Aldridge and Wells for families navigating estate administration without professional help. Families who can't afford an attorney but have things worth protecting. We see 12 families a month. I work with 2 junior associates. We document everything. Here is what I know. The people who walk through your mother's rooms and decide what matters and what doesn't are telling you everything about who they are. They're telling you that value is something they assign, that memory is something they manage, and that your grief is a logistical problem they feel qualified to solve. What they cannot see, what they will never see, is that you have already been there before them, quietly and carefully and completely. You have already moved what matters. You have already filed what protects it. You have done the one thing they never thought to do, which is to take them seriously before they gave you a reason to. The things that mattered are safe. They were always going to be safe. You knew that before the dumpster arrived. If this story reminded you that the things your mother left behind are worth protecting and that you have more power than you know to protect them, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Subscribe to Soft Storm Stories, and I will see you in the next one.